Hello, welcome to our 1 o'clock workshop. My name is Anna Koenig. I am a program coordinator here at the Kalamazoo Valley Museum, and we are so grateful that you are here this afternoon to join us for our second workshop for the 2020 Fretboard Festival. Before we get into our workshop with Bill Jones, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. First, all participants will be kept muted throughout the workshop session. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat box, and we will be getting to all of our questions at the end of Bill's session. And finally, we will be recording this session and making that available to participants afterward. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Jones.
All right. Well, this is an expanded scales workshop. But we'll cover a lot of information here. First of all, my name is Bill Jones, and I was asked to introduce my guitar. It doesn't have a name. Matt's guitar doesn't have a name either, but it is a local heritage guitar, which I've had for a long time, probably 22 years now, quite a while. So I'm very used to it. And only a couple well, a couple. I've put new pickups, new wiring, and push-pull pots and stuff, if you know what that it is. And, but other than that, it still looks like it's in decent condition, I think. The Heritage 535 is what it is. So, as far as the scales workshop goes, since this year with COVID, we are doing fewer workshops than usual. I will be covering quite a bit of ground in one workshop, hopefully getting at least a little bit to a bunch of different people that are all at different levels. At the end, we're going to try to do some questions, but along the way through, hopefully you'll get your own little details that will make the most sense for you along the way. Oh, there we are. Lost my screen for a second there. All right, we're back. So, quick overview of what we're going to talk about. Really quick, really light overview. Songs have a key, chords that correspond with that. So we're going to do an overview of key, what is a key, what are the chords in a key, and then on to some discussion about what the modes of major are. Many times people want to use modes, or they've heard that they should use modes, and there's just some misunderstanding about what a mode is. So a little bit of discussion about that would be good. Then going through and seeing how those modes apply to the most common chords. 1, 4, and 5 are in all styles of music. And then some other types of progressions that happen, the 2-5-1 common to jazz, or the minor 2-5-1, and how we add in some other modes. And then how all those concepts also apply to different types of blues, either a typical 12-bar blues or minor blues. And then later on, Matt and I will be playing I think with Summertime, which is like a variation of a minor blues. So first of all, we'll start off just some light discussion, quick discussion of what is a major scale, what is a major key, what are the chords in that key. So first of all, C major is the friendliest one to talk about because it's all natural notes. If you can find the white keys on a piano, you can play a C major scale. And the sound of it, very familiar. If you go from the first note to the second note, second to the third, each of those are whole steps apart, or 2 frets. Then a half step, and then 3 more whole steps, and then another half step. And that series of 2 wholes half, 3 wholes half is what a major scale is. Whatever note you would start on, if you do 2 whole steps, 1 half, 3 wholes, 1 half, it's a major scale. And then on each of those notes, especially, we'll start on C. If we take every other note going up, the first note of the scale, the third note, so 2 notes up, and the 5th note, that will give us the root, 3rd, and 5th of our tonic chord. So the tonic is the chord that is on the root of the scale. That first chord is C major, and you can see that the Roman numeral 1 is uppercase, with the C below it with a big uppercase M. Now, usually a major chord just says the letter name, usually. If it's a major 7, though, then we need some way to show that it's specifically a major 7. So just in this part, I put those M's in parentheses, just so you know. But every once in a while, you will see music with a large capital M next to the letter too. So the first chord is C major, then D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and C major. Going up the note, back to C major again. Really 7 chords. And if I go through those notes, just the notes that are in them, stacking the lowest note, 2 notes up, 2 notes up, playing those notes individually is what's called an arpeggio. So here are basic arpeggios for those chords. C major arpeggio, D minor arpeggio, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and back to the C major, an octave higher. And the word octave meaning 8 notes higher. Same notes as these, C, E, G, just higher. Now, the major chords in a major key, you can see that they're the first, fourth, and fifth chords, in this case C, F, and G. They sound very pleasant together, and if we take the C and a G together, they sound very nice, but those chords could be in the key of C or in the key of G. Either way, either way. So adding a 7th to the chord is something that gives this push, a really strong push from that 5-chord G to the C chord. You can hear our notes in the what are called the triads, 1, 2, 3 notes, root, third, and fifth of the scale. If we then stack another note up top, here's on the 5th note of the scale, the G, root, third, fifth. If we stack one more, it would be the 7th, because we're going up every other note in the scale starting on that note. So starting on the 5th note, 1, 3, 5, 7. And for time issues, trust me that this is a major chord and a minor 7th. It's the only one in the major scale that has both a major chord with a minor 7th. The other ones work out to be major chords with major 7ths. And that sound, that 7th chord, makes the G more dissonant and gives this tension that really wants to release to that C chord. So it's really one of the most obvious pushes in music. It just really wants to go from 5/7 to 1. Now, loosely, learning those arpeggios is important because then you have some idea of what you're playing. If you're just playing different chords in the key of C, and you can hear these chords, they sound nice together, and you're just kind of wandering through the C major scale, you're going to have a hard time knowing what these notes should sound like. But if you instead focus on what chord you're on and think about what are the notes in that chord and how do I play that scale differently according to that chord, then it leads you to more pleasant note choices. And then you can choose to play dissonant notes rather than just sort of wandering around and finding them. Now, at the bottom you can see G7 suggests mixolydian, C suggests major. So these are the first 2 modes that I've talked about, meaning that, oh, here we go. There we go. Meaning that on each note of the scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, if we start on that note, whichever one it is, in this case the 5th note, G, and then now think of that as the root, we're playing a mixolydian scale or mode, which is a mode of major. You'd call it the 5th mode of major because it starts on the 5th note of the scale. C major, 5th note, G, so this is the 5th mode. And if you look to the right of G major, you can see G, B, D, F. Those are the notes that happen in that chord, that G7 chord that we talked about. And I put all the different chord tones for all the other ones. You can see C major 7, F major 7. So the other two major chords, like I said, are major 7 chords, meaning a major chord and a major 7, versus a major chord and a minor 7, which gives us that type of tension that likes to move back to the 1 chord. So you can also see that these are all, or almost all, minus major and minor Greek words, right? There are Greek terms for major and minor also. Major is Ionian and minor is Aeolian. Those are on the handouts that I sent you. People don't usually refer to them as Ionian and Aeolian, but somebody might be playing C major and say, oh, I'm playing my C Ionian scale, when really they're just playing C major. They're just playing around. So you might hear those occasionally. One other quick thing is to look to the right where it says relationship. Now these modes are modes of C major, but they are also their own scales. Modes are not necessarily just played as a mode of major. So you can see to the right of Mixolydian, it says major with a minor 7th. So you can hear this right here. This is G major. And that would have an F sharp in it. Mixolydian is major with a minor 7th. So you can hear that it sounds different. It's one note off from a normal major scale. And so it has a different quality to it. Not wildly different, not hard to deal with, but just a little bit different. And then each of the other ones, minus the last one, is also either a major or a minor scale, just one note off. And then the last one you can see, B Locrian, is like a minor scale. Here's B minor first. And then we flat the second note and the 5th note. And this mode is based from a diminished chord, so you can hear that that's kind of a quirky, dissonant chord to linger on. So people don't very often write songs where Locrian is the main chord, because you can imagine if this doesn't sound like home bass, this doesn't sound like the chord you keep wanting to come back to. It sounds like something has to happen. So the other ones, sometimes you'll hear songs in any of those other ones, really. All right, so next up, in a major key, talked about this a little bit, the 1, the 4, and the 5 in C major, F major, and G major. That G major, it's a special type of 7th chord. Usually when we spot those 3 chords in that relationship, we can think, oh, well, that looks like it's a major scale. But sometimes they'll either not be in that order like that, or you'll hear a combination of chords and it won't sound like the chord that is that distance from the other chords is really the root chord. So you can hear this right here, and I'll play in D, 3 chords in D. And it sounds like when I come back to this D chord, like I've come back to home bass, the main chord. Many songs, though, do not just use those. You might hear now those chords, if we were thinking in major, would be in the key of G major, but the way I was playing it sounded like D was my main chord. Or the other way around. And because the way I'm emphasizing the D chord, and where this chord comes in, it sounds a little unusual, and that would be because I'm actually playing what would then be the 1, the 4, and then the flat 7 of Mixolydian. So really, these are the chords of D Mixolydian. Not G major, but D Mixolydian, with the way that I was playing them. And so many common, the classic example, everybody knows it's a D, C add 9, and G, but D, C, and G. And people hear that first chord as sounding like they're the main chord of the song, and they're right, but some people would say, oh, well, it's in D, but it's got a C in it. Like this one chord is just mysterious. Well, you could say it's in D, but you borrowed C. And you can see I wrote there borrowed chords. Sometimes songs have a blend of chords from different keys or different modes. But in this case, those chords really do make it sound like it's in D mixolydian. And so you'll see things like that sometimes that might confuse you as to, well, what key am I playing in exactly? So sometimes you will be clearly in a major key, sometimes you'll have a major chord as the main chord, and these other chords make you feel like you're in a different key. There's a good chance you're actually just in a mode. So now on down here, again, the arpeggios, I said they were important. C, E, G for C, F, A, C, G, B, D for the F and the G chord. And then you can hear, if I put those three chords together, they're pleasing to hear together. And I've got a little backup example here. One second here. Where's that at? There we go. A little backing track here. This won't sound spectacular, so forgive the quality of the cheesy background instruments. But it's going to be just a 1 chord, a 4 chord, a 5 chord, and a 1 chord. And the first thing you could do is to just work with the triads, work with the notes of the chords so you get to know what these notes are. Of course, it doesn't sound terribly musical or interesting, but that's how you get to know these notes. You just work your way through these notes a little bit. And then, when you've gotten to know that a little bit more, you can start imagining the rest of the notes, but thinking, okay, I'm really in C major, then in F Lydian, and then G mixolydian, back to C. Really, those are all notes in the key of C, but thinking of them as different modes leads you to think about the notes differently, so that when a note sounds pleasant over one chord but dissonant over another, you're just more aware of it. So now I'll think of those modes a little. Those arpeggios a little bit there so you can hear them. But that's generally where you can start, just to get used to these notes and how they sound together. And a convenient trick here, near the bottom you can see major pentatonic. When you create a pentatonic scale, which penta is for 5, and the standard scale has 7 notes, the standard pentatonic scales that we have take out sort of the problem notes. Usually the C major scale has this note right here, F, right next door to the E. And if you hit an F when you didn't want to, it's more dissonant against the C chord because it's going to really clash next door to that E. So the pentatonic scale gets rid of that. And then it gets rid of the B, which is right next door to the C. So your most potentially dissonant notes are taken out. And then when you go to the F, if you think of that as F major pentatonic, the notes that would have been dissonant for that also are different notes, but they're taken out also. So here's F Lydian. And we take out this note and this note. And then finally, G mixolydian. Change to G major pentatonic, and suddenly you have just the most comfortable notes of the scale there. Now, you don't necessarily always want to just play those notes, of course, but sort of mapping it out to get an idea of where those notes are at really, really helps a lot. And then likewise, you can see at the bottom of the page, D minor, E minor, A minor. the corresponding minor pentatonics would work with those two. Just starting on the note, say D for D minor. Here would be D Dorian versus D minor pentatonic. Or here's a more common form of it. And I have examples of a bunch of these things on the PDFs if you haven't looked at them yet. Sorry, getting my screen here. There we go. There we go. All right, so we talked a little bit about how 4 and 5 are our other two major chords in a major key. And it's very common. All different styles of music use these 3 major chords really commonly. Lots of styles of music also use the 2 chord instead of sort of the 4 chord to prepare for the 5, creating the 2, 5, 1. When you hear it like that, it's just a minor, a major, and a, sorry, screen keeps disappearing on me there. We keep with that 2, 5, 1, minor, major, major. We've been adding that 7th chord on the 5 chord already. And coming back to the 1 chord there, has that nice tension and push back. That 2 chord is really only 1 note off from the 4 chord, from F. You see there that F is F-A-C, and D minor is D-F-A. So it's really just a matter of switching back and forth between a C or a D. And that D minor, and then there's an F. Now, if we have all 4 of those notes, we actually get the 2 minor 7 chord. And if we use that with that 5-7 chord, and then go to the 1, it's now sounding much more like a jazz progression with these 7ths. Jazz really commonly uses the 7ths. So you can hear this, and then, since we've been doing it already, we'll start adding the 7th on the C chord also. 2 minor 7, 5 7, 1 major 7. It's D minor 7, G7, C major 7. So now, the corresponding modes that go with these, the 2nd mode of C major is D Dorian. The 5th mode, G Mixolydian. And then back to C major, working the same way that it did for the other modes. And then people will refer to these as 2 5s. They don't put the 1 in there because it's kind of just assume that you're working on these relationships, because they can actually be thrown in somewhere else in the song. You can kind of hear this. Now, if I started up higher, though, with 2 other in relation to a different note, 2 5s, you can hear how this cycles through. I can't really take the time to explain it all, but if you listen to this, you can hear that this is a 2 5 in a different key, and we can just keep moving through 2 5s. You hear that we just led back using those 2 5s. Oop, there we go. All right. Now, we've talked about some basic progressions, but we haven't really gotten to an important chord, which is the 6th chord, the minor chord, A minor in the key of C. And that one, there we go, that chord is referred to as the relative minor because compared to C, the 6th note, A, is where we get the A minor scale. Now, 2 of the other modes, Dorian and Phrygian, are just 1 note off from minor, but this is minor. 6th mode, relative minor of C. And similar to what we did in the major scale, if we now think of all the same chords being in A minor, because they have all the same notes, like the scale does, the C major scale, the 5 of this chord, because this is now going to be 1, the minor 1, 5 of it would be E minor. And you can hear E minor, A minor go together really nicely. But it doesn't have that push. Again, it's pleasant, but no real push. So if we change that E minor to E7, or E major, but especially E7, it then resolves neatly there. And there are other voicings that might work more nicely for you. But in doing that, we've had to change one note. So you can see right here, here's E minor. And if you don't know, trust me, that's a G. I have to change that G to a G sharp to create this E7 chord, to create our 5-7 to lead back. That note, the G to G sharp, in relation to A minor, the G is the 7th note, and if we raise the 7th note in minor to create this, we've created a different scale called A harmonic minor. Now, you may, when you go back to the A minor, you can stay in harmonic minor, or you can go back to what you were playing before. That there are a lot of reasons to do whatever you want, but it's really about that chord there, where we've created this chord with that raised 7th note. So harmonic minor is really a scale at its core that creates the 5-7 chord in minor. So we can have that nice push back right there. Sometimes you'll see there harmonic minor can be represented by a minor major 7, because if we put that 7th note in, the 1 chord, we suddenly get this chord. You can see right, you can visualize my chord. Sort of a simplified version here. Here's what you'd usually think of as maybe a minor 7, but we have to raise that 7th note to a G sharp. So if we put the G sharp in the A chord, get this A minor major 7. Dissonant, but satisfying chord. Sometimes it's too dissonant to be the 1 chord for what a person wants in their song, because it's just they don't want their main chord to be that dissonant. So they might stick with the minor 7 or even the minor 6. It just kind of depends on the circumstance and what someone is writing, what their melody sounds like. And depending on which of those chords you're resolving to, you can hear here's an A minor, just to get used to the sound again. So I'm going to do the 2, trust me on this for a second, 2, even though we haven't gotten there, 5 to the 1 with a major 7. Sounds very dissonant, and here you could play harmonic minor scale or melodic minor. Melodic minor raises the 6th note and the 7th note. And this version of it, the sort of classical version of it, is to have it raised on the way up and then lowered on the way down. Sort of adjusting, raised on the way up in order to make the melody flow upward, and lowered on the way down to make the melody flow downward. And that, there we go, it's more of the classical approach. And of course, you're never locked into playing it one way or the other, but the sort of jazz minor approach that people refer to this as jazz minor wise, they talk about just the ascending version of the scale. And then different modes of that scale, but we won't go into that right now really. There are a couple more common modes from that scale, but it's a lot of material to cover here, so we have to keep moving. One other small thing I wanted to talk about here is if we play the 1 chord, A minor 7, or A minor major 7, or A minor 6, it can be a little confusing sometimes for people to think of this chord as a minor 6, because it's a minor chord with a major 6. And naming it minor 6, it's hard for people to wrap around their head at some points, because it's to say minor 6 and then play a major 6 in the chord. The minor is referring to the triad, and the 6 is just the 6th note of the major scale, really. So a little confusing, but that's the minor 6 chord. All right, moving on now. So the 2, 5, oh, no, that was supposed to be the next one. There we go. So now we've got the minor 2, 5. In minor, if we are thinking about A is our 1 now, if we go to the 2nd note, the B, build a 7th chord, we get B half diminished 7, which some people might prefer to refer to as the minor 7 with a flat 5. Either way, you'll see that slash through a circle, meaning half diminished 7, or you'll see minor 7, flat 5. It's the same chord. And then that goes to the 5-7, which we already said harmonic minor creates. And then we have our options for whether or not we land on minor 7, minor major 7, or minor 6. And you can see the list of scales at the bottom, whichever one of those that you landed on, whichever one the song has as the one chord, you have some options. And sometimes it's very clear which one it should be, but not all the time. Sometimes it just sounds nice to have a variety of scales on the same chord. The other thing to talk about, harmonic minor. A harmonic minor. Since we're using that on the 5 chord, we're really playing the 5th mode of A harmonic minor, which is sometimes called Phrygian dominant, because it's like a Phrygian scale with a dominant chord as its tonic. But it's a satisfying sound scale. Really a pleasing mode of harmonic minor. Probably the most common mode of harmonic minor, probably the most common non-major mode that people have heard. You can imagine that sound for Ave Nagila. But it's a great scale. So the 5th mode of harmonic minor or Phrygian dominant, sometimes Spanish Phrygian, I've heard that too, but Phrygian dominant is kind of more the standard name. So well worth practicing that one. And finally, that brings us around to the 12-bar blues. It might seem strange to go through all these modes and then get to the blues, but there are some sort of key things about the blues that understanding the modes first will be helpful for. So typically you think you see a 1 chord, and I'm going to do this in A now, key of A. A, D, E, A, 1, 4, and 5. We're down here, open chords. Typically, you'd see those chords, see the 1, 4, 5, and you think of major. Like I said, the 1 chord has a major 7. The 4 chord has a major 7, and the 5 chord is a dominant 7th chord, major chord with a minor 7. But the 12-bar blues uses 1, 4, and 5 also, but with all 3 chords as dominant 7th chords. So the sound of it is immediately different, right? It's sort of like we're starting off in A mixolydian, because like we talked about, mixolydian corresponds with the 5 chord usually, but with that dominant 7th chord. So you can hear how that goes pleasantly with that A7 chord. And then it's like when we go to the 4 chord, it's now shifted to D mixolydian, sort of. And then E mixolydian on the 5 chord. Which would be normally the 5 chord is where you'd see mixolydian. But, sorry, get my screen going here. There we go. But in this case, it's a little confusing. People sometimes feel like they don't know what to play over it. They see the 1, the 4, and the 5, and they start thinking, well, I've learned a major scale, now I have to play major. And it won't sound right. It won't sound right at all. One key thing to this sort of basic 12-bar blues is that even though that chord is built on a major chord with a minor 7, it's really about this sort of combination of major and minor qualities. So usually the first scale that people play over this chord, which is a major triad with a minor 7th, is a minor pentatonic or a minor blues scale. Especially that form. That shape, that form on the guitar is just in every style of guitar music. It just works so well on the instrument. So we've got that minor pentatonic scale over a major chord with a minor 7. And the sound of that Let me get my example here. All right. The sound of that you can hear if I just repeat the one chord a few times here, so you can just hear me play over it a little bit. The one chord is the seventh chord, so I'll play just the arpeggio, so you can hear that. Inoffensive, but not particularly musical or bluesy at all. And then, sort of the underlying mode is Mixolydian, also sounds fine, but not particularly bluesy, right? You hear this? Right? Sounds fine, but not bluesy. But against that major third, a lot of times that minor pentatonic or blues scale, pentatonic or blues, with the minor third against the major third of the chord is really a central part of that sound. And here, I'll just play that scale now with it. You hear that note? So you hear those notes. There's this clashing sound going on there in a pleasing way, right? And because of that, that note, since the C sharp of the A chord is right next door to it, it's the note that might be one of the most bent notes in the scale on the guitar, because kind of bending toward that note, though not necessarily bending all the way to it. And then a lot of times then doing a little hammer on them from the minor third to the major third. And I'll just give a little example of that here. That just works really nicely over that. But at the same time, you might not want to just play that one scale over and over again, of course, and that one form jumping up and down the neck. So what you have to start to do is branch out a little bit more. So on the next page here, there's our basic 12-bar blues in A. The A7, 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 A7. That's 4 bars or 4 measures of one chord, the one chord. Then 2 measures of the D7 chord, which is the 4, 2 measures of the 1, and then last 4 bars are 5, 4, 1, usually 5, though that can be the 1 chord at the end too, but usually it's a 5 that brings you back around to the beginning again. So typically, if we just start on A for now, because we don't need to practice all these things at once, you just start on the 1 chord and get used to that. There we go. Then you think of the arpeggio, like we did a few minutes ago. Right? And then Mixolydian, not because it sounds bluesy, but because it maps out your general notes. More or less mapping out the key of the song. Then the minor pentatonic minor blues. And then finally you see at the bottom, major pentatonic and major blues. Now that, like I said, the minor to major sounds really satisfying in the blues, but the major pentatonic and major blues really works well too. So you can hear, if I go back and forth between them, blues, and major blues. And now I'll play them with that 1 chord again, so you can hear those together. Kind of shift back and forth between the minor pentatonic or blues and the major pentatonic or blues. Just wandering up and down those notes there so you can get an idea of what those sound like together. And many times, people's approach at first, that you'll think of just this first scale that people learn, and sort of just spot a note of a chord. Oh, that's the note of the chord you were just playing, so maybe I'll change this note in this case, because it's hard to keep track of all these notes at first, all these different scales. So a more visual approach sometimes really helps people sort of visualize what chord you're playing somewhere, and then just change the notes according to the chord. Then, when you go to the 4 chord, the D7 chord, instead of having to immediately memorize all these scales, you can just picture, well, this is a D7 chord, this note was in the A chord, but this is changed here. It's a G to an F sharp. So to get yourself moving, playing that A minor pentatonic scale, but changing that one note, get you in the direction of the notes that really sound pleasing with that. And then you notice, oh, this is G to F sharp. This is a G to F sharp down here too. So you can change that note down there also, giving you the D major or the D7 arpeggio plus this note right here. And now I'll try to demonstrate that a little bit here over the 12-bar blues. What I'm going to do is play the A minor pentatonic. I'm going to try to limit myself just to that, and then just change notes from that to reflect the new chord. So D7 changes G to F sharp, E7 there or there, you can see here, G to G sharp. And instead of C, you've got a B right here. So you can see G to G sharp, B, G sharp, B. So some different notes outside of our first scale. So here's the 4 chord. If I just change one more note to that B, so now I've got that D major pentatonic scale. And then to the E, which G sharp, G to G sharp, up here, G to G sharp, down here, G to G sharp. So, give a little example of that. There's that F sharp. And the G sharp. The F sharp. Now the G sharp again. That sounds very kind of canned at this point because I'm being very conscious of these notes and thinking about it a lot. And at first, that's just what it sounds like. You're gonna play these notes really consciously. It's not gonna sound terribly bluesy, but you have to kind of play with the notes to get an idea of what you're playing with, you have to hear those notes. And on this note, one other quick thing to note in this sort of standard 12-bar blues. Oh, there we go. One second. You can see that the minor pentatonic and minor blues, especially on the 1-7 or the A7 in this case, the minor sounds really nice against that 1 chord. And the major pentatonic, major blues, really it fits on all 3 chords. Not that the minor doesn't fit on the D7 and the E7. You can make a lot of those notes fit in there nicely, but it's not the first notes that are going to sound right to your ear probably. The majors will probably sound more pleasing more quickly. So that was a basic 12-bar blues in A, surrounding these 3 major chords with a minor 7th, dominant 7ths. Then we have the minor blues, which is going to relate to what we're going to play later, probably play Summertime, I think. But you can see here now we have 1 1 1 1, 4 4 1 1, 2 5 1 2 5. So two things. One is that the ones and the fours are all minors. And now in those last four bars, we've got some twos in there. The 2 5, 2 5 1 that we've talked about before. We now have a slightly different sound for the minor blues. And because of that, this, with the 2 5s, it immediately sounds jazzier than just the straight 12-bar blues. But these chords, the two chords happen in all styles of music. It's not just in jazz. So right here, you can see A minor now, which we talked about, the minor pentatonic, and that clearly is what works well here. The major pentatonic over these will not sound right. You could pull it off on the 5 chord, because that one's a dominant 7th chord, so it's a major chord, but not like how we were playing it before, just sort of throwing it in whenever. And then, which we lightly talked about earlier, the 7th mode of C major, 7th note is the B. That's also the 2nd note of A minor. So the 7th mode of major is Locrian, which is the 2nd mode of minor. So you can see on these chords that say 2, we'd use a Locrian there, or there are other things you can play too, but that's a good starting point. Locrian on 2, and then our harmonic minor mode 5 on the 5, and then minor 7 works well on that sorry, getting this back. Just the minor scale will work well on the 1 chord, but you can also use Dorian or even for a moment those raised notes from harmonic minor and melodic minor. So just to give you a little bit of this sound here, we've got the 2, the 5, and then the 1. So we've got this sound here. I'm arpeggiating these chords a little bit here so you can just get the sound of it in your ears. And so now, rather than just being typical sort of a sound of the blues, we have this sort of jazz element to it that sort of expands the general sound. And especially on that 5 chord. 5th mode of harmonic minor. So that's the one I remember we called Phrygian dominant. Just a satisfying sounding scale. Always really liked that one. And come back to the 1 chord, and depending on the chord, depending on the melody, could be minor, could be harmonic minor, could be melodic minor. And you know, those notes lead upward so nicely. Or even Dorian. And then right there, see scales, as we talked about before, for the different situations, plus the minor pentatonic and blues over the 1 chord. And then over the 4 chord also. And that concludes the lecture part here. We've still got a little bit of time here for some questions, if there are any. This is, again, the material I covered a lot of ground, so that hopefully there's a little bit of something for everybody. But it's a lot of material, and I mean, you could work on studying all of this for a long time. So,
we do have a question right
yep,
now.
yep.
The question is, do you change modes as you change chords, or do you play one mode over the entire chord progression?
Right. Generally, change a mode to correspond with that chord as it changes. Yes. So as the progression goes along, the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 5 chord, the 1. Over the 2 chord, thinking of D Dorian, the 5 chord, Mixolydian, and then over the 1 chord, major. Now, those were all the same notes. Those are all just the notes from C major, but by thinking of them as different modes in that situation, you play the notes differently, because thinking of this and seeing that the root, 3rd, 5th, 7th of that chord, those are going to be your comfortable notes. And then all the notes outside of that, which are still in the key of C major, are going to create tension differently than they would over the other chords. So you're playing the same notes, but thinking of them differently. So in that situation, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. And then another question is, how do you define mode, and how is this different from key?
Right. We blew right on through that. So it's a good question, and that is the big thing that is uncomfortable for people usually. Just what is a mode? Because you can be handed a scale and be told, well, this is a mode. Well, okay, well, that's great. A mode can be either a scale created in relation to another scale, like in this case, same notes in C major as there are in D Dorian. So I would be playing the second mode of C major by thinking of those same notes in a different way, thinking of the D now as my root. In that case, the mode is at its most basic way what a mode is. It's when you think of one scale and you start on a different note of that scale, and you have this different series of whole and half steps, even though you have the same notes. And so it creates a mode of that scale. So since the C major scale has 7 notes, it has 7 corresponding modes. That doesn't mean that when you're playing in a song that you use all of them, or that you have to use one of them as your main mode either. You can play a song that centers around D minor 7, and in this case, and just call that the 1 chord. You think of So What by Miles Davis. They're on that D minor 7 chord, and for the most part, the song is in D Dorian. So really it is both a mode of a different scale and also the key in that case. The key is the collection of notes that is just your home base scale. And a mode is referring to a scale, how it relates to another scale. So hopefully that clears that up a little bit there.
And then, what is a good strategy to learn modes, picking one at a time?
Yes, yeah. The C major scale is convenient just because it's all natural notes, right? So you get to know these notes on your instrument. You get to figure out where E and F is and B and C. So you start to figure out where your notes are, and just seeing how these scales relate to each other in one key to start with. So starting off with the C major scale, feeling comfortable with that, and then playing the same notes, but starting on D, emphasizing D, giving you that D Dorian mode, but it can be its own scale or even its own key if you want to use it in a song as the main tonic chord, the main root chord. So the approach would be to just literally start, I've got that list here early on, right here. I don't know if you can see that right now or not. But the modes of C major, so those are your 7 basic modes of major, and in the key that has no sharps, no flats. So literally just going through these one by one and thinking about, well, what does this mode sound like when I just play it by itself? Because in relation to C, if you were playing a song in the key of C and just moving through chords in the key of C, well, it would just sound like you're shifting around the notes in C major and you're really just in C the whole time. But picking one of those, one at a time and really getting to know what it sounds like on its own will help you to get a sense of what those modes sound like and how you would want to use them, if you particularly liked it and wanted to use it in a song.
So we have two more questions.
Sure.
Is the key always the one?
Generally, yeah. Some songs are complex enough that when you're looking at the chords, it can be hard to tell which one the one chord is. But usually you hear this sort of home bass chord that sounds like it's the most comfortable chord, and the way the melody flows, it just brings you back to that chord and it's more obvious. And then you would call that the one chord and call that the key. But it can be a little confusing because if that one chord is a major chord, we'll say D major, and then you get a bunch of G chords, but then a bunch of C chords, it could be confusing because these are the 1, 4, and 5 in the key of G. So it's a blend of both trying to listen to hear what is the main chord, and we're calling that one the tonic or the root chord, the one chord, and then watching out for whether or not it has chords that don't really fit in major. And then figuring out, oh, well, it's got this flat 7 chord. That happens in Mixolydian. So I must be not in D major, I must be in D Mixolydian. So now my 3 major chords are a 1, a 4, and what's called a flat 7, because it's a half step down from where it would be if it were in a major scale.
Okay, and then the final question is, do you teach private lessons?
I do, as a matter of fact. Yeah, and actually I put my information on the PDF handouts.
Yeah.
So,
If you want
yep.
to write your email, we can put it in the chat box.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yes. It's a long name, William Frank Jones, all one word. So W-I-L-L-I-M, oh, that was quick. Yeah. William Frank Jones @gmail.com. There are a lot of Bill Joneses out there, so I just had to put the whole name. Yeah. And yes, the PDFs have a lot of information, and if you would like help unlocking all that information, of course, I would be happy to help. I do online lessons only right now, but in the future, I plan on starting to do in-person again, too. It's just with COVID. So,
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.